So, welcome. We're on the next to the next to the last session. So this is
Yes.
all about emotions in the wide world, and next session is the conclusion. And the last session, I'd like to talk about the dictionary in the back of the book. And after that, we're going to begin dignity and leadership. So you'll have both me and Marcel, and that's going to run for a while because there's about 15 chapters. So it's going to have a long run. And if you want to come, you're welcome. We'll be here recording and sharing as always. Well, before we begin, let me just say that so this chapter, it has a funny name, emotions in the wide world. And some people may say, well, how come? How come you named it that way? And I think the reason is because when we were writing this book, when we were writing this chapter, we had some grandchildren around, and there was a book they were reading about something in the wide world. So we thought, well, that's kind of nice. That's kind of a sweet title about, well, how do emotions show up in the wide world, all around us, all around us. So I'm curious first, if as you read, anything stand out to you? Any surprises? Any questions? Anything that you're coming with
I'll say I love history as emotional choreography. That's brilliant, and that's exactly what it is. And depending upon the choreographer, who's producing the production, directing the production, history is interpreted emotionally quite differently.
Yeah,
That really got my attention.
lovely. Thank you.
I think one of the sections you had, well, two caught my interest just from my background. One is the leadership side and how we're caught where I'm going to go half, but it's not. Half the world is still, you leave your emotions at the door, and the other half is, oh, these are in everything. Everything that we do is there. And
Yeah.
then the other one is competitive sport. And I saw a quote, NBA play, the gentleman is 7'4". I think his last name is Bellamy. If anybody basketball's listening, they'd be horrified. But his actual quote was, "I'm not prepared to carry the burden of hiding emotions." On talking about, I believe he had tears on the NBA court or on the bench or something, and I just remember thinking, oh, yes, finally. And so you see so much emotion in sport, and yet so little is actually paid attention to in there as well. Those were the
Wow,
two.
lovely. Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, I'll mention, well, I'm still a little in the last week's um, session, and I want to just thank you. I know you
Yeah.
and I have been having a conversation about like emotional safe harbors and coming in between these big waves of emotions, not just my own, but just noticing in other people's. Like, wow, and you asked a good question of like, what is the barrier to say equanimity or peace and why I can't get there so quickly? And I'm thinking it's just, I'm so not hardwired that way to get to equanimity and peace. Like I'm so much more hardwired to be anxious or
Mm.
stressed, you know, all the other things around it. So I've been noticing in these days of I have this like pile of wiring that I'm kind of pulling out. And
Mhm.
you know that pile of cables you have that's just kind of, you don't know what devices they even go into anymore, but you don't quite want to throw them out because you know they're going to be
Yeah.
useful one day.
Yeah.
So I'm just deciding that I'm just taking those out, and I can choose the conversation from last week of like you can actually choose some of this, and you don't have to stay stuck in these emotional patterns. And I'm gonna just recycle those cables, I think,
Okay.
and just get, you know,
Yeah.
I don't really need them that much. So this like emotional safe harbors of like my own touchstones that when I'm in conversation with the wide world, I can just come back to in my own moment. And I found myself testing it with my brother, who was very, very charged up last night. And curiously, he was talking in isms, and all the a bunch of isms. And I'm like, okay, I can just stay here and listen peacefully to you. I don't need to like rile myself up with the isms,
Yeah.
which would normally rile me up. So there's a nice overlay in these conversations that we're having in the flow of the book and the wide world happening in real time.
Love it. Well,
Thanks.
they're absolutely connected. You and your emotions and the wide world, absolutely connected. One thing that I've come to believe since we wrote the book is that a helpful way for me to think about emotions is that they're one of our senses, but we've never named them as a sense. But like sight and hearing and touch and smell, because we even talk about them that way. I feel, oh, interesting. But one analogy, one piece of that analogy is really helpful for me, is that you think that, well, certain people, their eyes are very sensitive to light. So anytime they go outside, they have to wear sunglasses. So they regulate, the amount of light that hits their eyes. Some people with smell, some people with touch, some people with all these different senses we have. And for me to think about emotions that way is really helpful because then your sensitivity to emotions doesn't make you wrong. It just makes you sensitive. That's all. And as we would do with sensitivity for any other thing, we would find a way to regulate it. How do I take care of myself given that this is the way the world shows up for me? And for me, that's so helpful because I don't think probably anything wrong with you. We're okay. Some people are more sensitive, some people are less sensitive. But regardless, the people who are maybe less sensitive have to find ways to be more attentive and more focused if that is what they're trying to achieve. And the people who are naturally very sensitive to things may have to find a way to cope with it. And that's just life as a human being, as far as I'm concerned. So for me, that's a very helpful, I don't know if it's 100% true, but it's a helpful way to think about emotions for me. Yeah. Cool. Well, today, here's what I thought we'd do. So, all the things we always say, this is going to be recorded, etc. But I thought, well, let's just go through these key themes because what we did last time is we talked about emotions mainly from the perspective of us. And I think that that's often where we begin because once we understand our emotions, then other people's emotions make a lot more sense. So I think it's logical to start there. But I think that as much as our emotions are important, I think the other side of the coin is collective emotions, the emotions around us, the emotions we encounter, because we don't live in a vacuum, right? We live in a world, and the world is full of emotions. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hello, thank
So,
you.
yeah, so I thought, well, let's just look at these different things. And these are all in the book, but I put a few notes by them and I didn't pay attention to what's written in the book as much as how I think about them these days. Organizations, one of my favorite things, and this still happens, that I have people, leaders of organizations say, leave them at the door. Emotions have no place. And I think, it's a little bit crazy in a way because without loyalty, we couldn't have an organization, any organization without trust. We couldn't have any organization without service. What would be the point of having an organization? So even just those, I think, okay, maybe some of the other ones you're not so comfortable with, but it's pretty hard for me to think about denying these because these are what constitute organizations. And I have never ever worked with any organization or any group that these were not important to. So for me, this whole idea that, well, let's just get used to the idea that emotions are necessary in organizations and that maybe to recognize that the reason we want to leave them at the door is because they make us uncomfortable. Or sometimes they make life a little more complicated, is that, if I want everybody in enthusiasm and I've got somebody who's in apathy or resignation, well, that's something I have to take care of. That's something I have to address. That's something I have to resolve in some way. I have to attend to it, and that takes energy. So that part's understandable. But I would say acceptance that we are emotional beings. We're all emotional beings. Everybody in our organization has lots of emotions. We want them to bring every day. And the ones that are less comfortable or helpful, well, let's learn about them. Let's address them and let's learn to shift them or align ourselves emotionally. And I think there's a lot of work we can all do in that territory. So, other thoughts, ideas about emotions in organizations? Brenda?
Well, this one just hits very close to home for me because I've worked in organizations that definitely did not encourage any kind of emotional expression. And when I look back, I think it was the uncomfortable, just the idea that be having emotions would be uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yep.
And but I think it's really about they didn't want any kind of emotional outburst. They did
Yep.
not want any kind of emotional um, uh, expression that would derail a meeting or something like that. Like
Yep.
it was literally feared, which is an emotion in itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like they just wanted very like calm, measured communication all the time, and any kind. But like we always say, we're feeling something all the time. It's driving our behavior, and to discount or ignore that is just counterproductive.
Yeah. So one of the points I always make when I'm working with groups or teams or organizations is I I'm not interested in you being more emotional. That's not what I'm here to talk about. It's not about being more emotionally expressive. Really, it's not about being less emotionally expressive or less emotional. It's completely about understanding emotions and seeing them as a tool. And so, if you do, then in that situation where you feel like bursting out, well, but I get to decide. In fact, it's my responsibility to decide. And if I've got the tools, then I can decide. I can navigate those situations. So I think that that's helpful for people because that takes
Mhm.
away some of that fear, like, oh, you want everybody to walk around all the time crying and screaming and yelling and singing Kumbaya. And I'm like, no, actually, I don't really like Kumbaya that much. So I'm not really in favor of that. I'm really in favor of people just being grounded in their emotions and understanding them. And that's all. Use them as a tool. That's it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, lovely, but lovely example because that's very common.
What I like about that, Dan, or I guess what stands out to me about what you just said is working in corporate, I will hear people use all of this language, like we want to build trust, right, with our
Mhm.
employees or between our leaders and our employees, and we want people to be loyal to the company or feel pride and satisfaction. So we talk about these emotions, but through very transactional lenses.
Mhm.
And I think looking at it and thinking about it through this lens actually expands what organizations and leaders have in terms of their ability to actually make these real for people. So it's not just, things that are on the wall in terms of the values or the beliefs that we have. Like, what does it actually look like when you're building trust and your employees feel trust with you? So I feel like it gives us more ability to help them say more clearly if we want to build trust with our employees, what does that really look and feel like? What are the experiences we're creating for them that they feel that way from us?
Yep. Beautiful. Yeah, I agree. This is knowing and when we put it on the wall, that's knowing about emotions. Like, sure, who's going to argue that we don't want trust in this organization? Of course, we all do, but are we capable of generating it? Are we capable of recognizing when we slide in the direction of distrust? Can we repair trust? Can we maintain trust? Can we strengthen trust? Do we know how to do that? Because if we don't know how to do that, then it's a nice thing to say but it doesn't live in the culture of the organization. Marcia.
I just wanted to share briefly. I worked in an organization that really normalized emotions, and the CEO would frequently use words like love.
Hmm.
And it was so great because it was very normal to express emotion. And even, if you were upset about something, it was okay. And I don't think they had emotional, training or particular literacy, but it was a cultural thing
Yeah.
where emotion was very normal, and it was wonderful. It was
Yeah.
it
Lovely.
really it did bring the values and the mission alive.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lovely. Good. Well, as we go, there's, I think, 17 of these. There's quite a few bullets here. So I'm going to reserve the right that if we don't get through them all today, we can revisit, we can finish them next week. Okay. So I don't want to rush through this because all of these there's so much about them that we could explore. So related to organizations, leadership, right? That they're a tool and, for everything. We talk about this all the time at Dignity Inc. and Dignity in Leadership about problem solving and decision making and relationship building and all the things that we do that have emotions at their root. One of the theories about emotions, why that we even develop them, is that they allow us to have relationships. And if you think about, well, what does a leader need? Well, a leader needs relationships. And if they don't have that capacity, then everything becomes very mechanical. And so the idea of, how do I generate enthusiasm in my team, in my organization? How do I build trust, right? How do I repair trust? How do I generate loyalty? All of these things, for me, they're absolutely based in emotions. But you all work with leaders, so anything you would add to this section?
It's not an add down, but definitely an awareness now is that there's almost like a silent culture in organizations. And Marsha, how beautiful to hear a senior executive use the word love in their workplace of work. Like, so rich. And the silent culture is that emotional culture. So rarely do leaders stop and think, how do I want my people to feel at the end of the day? Like, what is the emotion that would be most helpful towards our success or towards our cohesion as a team? And it's just a language that as soon as it becomes normalized, as Marsha spoke about, the work elevates naturally. The leader's tools, the possibility is right there. So it's amazing to me that we've actually managed to go this long without it.
Yeah.
And there's a richness coming. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, sometimes it is surprising, but here we are. So, yeah.
This reminded me of we used to say at the firm I used to work at, how leaders bring the weather. And
Mm.
when I was reminded of that phrase when I was reading the book, and it talked about the mood, Dan, that leaders bring to an organization, and it can be like fear or urgency or ambition. And I do think some leaders do that subconsciously, but imagine if they were being very intentional around the mood they wanted to create in their organization and how they talked about that through this lens and not just through the action oriented business language per se, which makes it a very kind of like achievement and often competitive lens, but to tap into something a little bit more deeper for people. But they set that tone. The phrase is leaders bring the weather is
Yeah.
a phrase that people will say around when you're trying to do like leadership development or coaching to help them think about how the way they enter rooms and spaces and navigate them sets the tone for everyone else in terms of how they'll show up, how they'll engage.
Yeah, yeah, lovely. And just like the weather, one thing I'd say is, well, sometimes rain's good. Sometimes thunderstorm can be exciting.
Mhm.
So it's not all that, in my view, that a leader should always show up, in love and in compassion. And, those are lovely. Those are wonderful to have access to. But sometimes leaders need to bring urgency. They need to bring, a little bit of apprehension about things. They need to sometimes bring emotions that maybe are uncomfortable for people. But intention, wow, can we do it intentionally? That's
Mhm.
what I would be looking for.
Yeah, I think that's that key word there, Dan, is that intention behind it. Like if they're saying like I'm actually trying to light a fire under people or create a little bit of discomfort to get some action.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, that can be powerful when they think about it through that lens of intentionality.
yeah, lovely. So politics, this one I got really curious about recently, and I had a little chat with Chat GPT about this, about, okay, so let's talk about emotions and politics. And one of the things, because it makes perfect sense to me. If you think about, okay, if you're somebody who's deeply compassionate about the well-being of others, then where are you going to be on the spectrum politically? Well, you'd probably be a little bit more on the liberal side. What if you're somebody, who's very much about, um, let's say, honor, right? Doing things in the right way. So I think that it's it's not that one end of the political spectrum has one set of emotions and the other has the other. Because I would say loyalty exists throughout. I would say that, compassion probably exists throughout. And yet, some parts of that spectrum probably weigh more heavily in terms of compassion, others in terms of other emotions. So for me, this is quite interesting. And one of the things that I've realized is that I wouldn't say I'm apolitical, but I would say I'm not politically involved and I'm not particularly politically concerned. And the reason is for me because I think underneath politics is emotions. And I think that when politicians or other people say we want to control the narrative, what they're really saying is we want to control the story because that controls the emotions. And so for me, I see all of these things, organizations, leadership, politics, as kind of subsets of emotions or sitting on top of emotions or however we want to think about it. So I find it very interesting to think about politics through this lens. And of course, fear is part of politics and ambition is part of politics and hubris is part of politics. But I find looking at politics through an emotional lens is fascinating because they're all there. They're all there somewhere, and you can see the impact. You can see what they're driving if you step back and look through that lens. So I know that politics is charged. People get very excited about it. People have lots of beliefs and opinions about it. And again, for me, I think that's fine, but I think there's also value in being able to step back and say, yep, and what's the energy here? What's the energy that's driving this to be the way it is, or this particular current or flow or era of politics? So thoughts
I
about
want, can I,
politics without being political?
yeah,
Yeah,
can I
Marie,
add something to that?
of
I
course.
just I just find this subject not only in this discussion but in out in the wild, inextricably linked to with culture. And as Brenda was, I think it was Brenda, you said you were earlier speaking about your brother. Oh no, someone else was speaking. Jen, a new person to me,
Oh,
about being with her brother who was kind of monologuing about all the isms. And it seems so much to me in my experience that political action is deeply motivated in and almost inextricable from the isms that people believe in culturally, who they're afraid of, why they're afraid, how we deal with differences, and then labeling, which is for me what the isms are all about, is trying to label and isolate things that both we do understand and that we don't understand. To say that I'm a certain ism, that I represent a certain ism is for some people a badge of honor, right? It's a matter of pride.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but it does affect I think, our animal behavior, our political behavior. Um,
yeah. So emotions, part of politics. Yeah. How about science? Well, science, I always heard growing up, science is neutral. And I came to realize that actually science isn't neutral at all. Science is based on skepticism and curiosity. It's based on these two emotions, I think, mostly. Curiosity because, oh, well, how does that work? And what can we learn about that? And how can we create something? I think curiosity everywhere in science. But if you think about, well, once you've created something or written a paper or proposed a solution to something, what do? Well, you have a peer review, and the peer review is all about skepticism. Really? Can you reproduce those results? Because that's not how we used to think about it. So you want us to think about this differently. Well, you're going to have to clear the bar for that. So what I see is that these two emotions play hand in hand in science, and I think that's fine. But I think they're the emotions that drive science, and then, as a result, the technology that we create out of science. And I think what sometimes there are other emotions here, like euphoria, pride, loyalty. I think back to I had read previously about Robert Oppenheimer and Trinity Project and the atomic bomb, and that he said later, he said, I so regret so many things we did in creating that. And I thought, it's interesting because regret could come later, but what were the emotions that drove it at the beginning? Well, loyalty, patriotism in the sense of loyalty, but also curiosity, excitement, pride, elation, all these emotions that you might feel creating something amazing that's never been created before. And I think okay, that's how it works. I think that what we're missing is being aware of that in the moment that we're doing that. We're not conscious of, well, what emotions are driving me to do this, and are there any emotions that might be good to include, like prudence? I don't know, maybe. So again, there's no judgment here about, okay, you create what you create. But I think that I remember reading an article remember when avatars were big in what's that called? Meta reality. I don't know, whatever. It came and went. Maybe it'll come back. I don't know. But
Metaverse, I think. Was it the
the
metaverse
metaverse,
standard?
there you
Yeah.
go. Okay. And I read an article and it said, well, because some of the avatars were being, bad players in the metaverse. They weren't playing nice. And I remember reading an article that this woman interviewed the designers and said, well, could you create a metaverse where people aren't unkind to each other? And it was so fascinating because the designer said, well, yeah, of course we could. But, right, we just design based on what we know. Essentially, that's what this person said. And I thought this is really interesting because the person designing the metaverse can only design it to the degree that they're aware and conscious of the possibilities. And if they're not really connected with emotions and how emotions work in people, then how could they design a metaverse where people behave differently? Like, you couldn't, it would be impossible. So again, I find that this lack of being aware in the moment of creation for me is a big miss on our part. I think we could do much, much better at that. And I think possibly have less long-term consequences, which we don't like dealing with. Yeah. So I hope I didn't offend anybody who loves the metaverse because I never really understood it. And I don't have any goggles or anything. Okay, psychology. So psychology, you probably heard me say this. Well, when we were dividing up the world into sciences, we had to put emotions somewhere, and so we invented psychology. We'll put them there. We created it as a science, and yeah, lovely. There they have a home. But emotions are, a huge aspect of psychology and well-being and therapy and counseling. I think they're often presented, used, leveraged in ways different than we do in coaching or in education, but nonetheless, right, they're at the core of pretty much everything that's done in psychology. although it also includes other things like, somatic exercises and practices and investigations. So, emotions, psychology. So, another one, money. So, this quote, finance is 90% emotion, 10% arithmetic. I had a financial planner once, and she was great. And she taught a course, taught a class. And so I went. And she said this. She said, every single person in this room has plenty of math skills to sort out your finances. That's not the issue at all. 90% of what your challenge is emotions. What you want, what you're willing to give up, what you what you love, what you're apathetic about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She said that's where we need to do the learning. That's where we need to investigate. And so she worked with values, she worked with beliefs, she worked with behaviors, but at the root, she said, you know what, where we really need to work is we really need to get clear on what is it that moves us to save money versus spend money. What is it? What are the emotions that have us get into debt deeper and deeper and deeper and not have a plan to get out of it or the possibility to get out of it? And there we're talking about hope, hopelessness, right? Despair, optimism, denial, right? All kinds of emotions that are absolutely at the root of how we manage our finances. And you don't have to be in financial trouble. I mean, this is true all the time, that this is what's driving our choices about our money and how we make it and how we spend it. Yeah. So organized religion. So for me, without faith, without some other emotions, absolutely would be impossible. I think respect is often there. Adoration is a part of some religions. I think search for serenity and peace is in some. So I think that emotions are part of this. We're told, I mean, I grew up with Protestant minister. My father was a minister, and he was quite liberal. He was quite ecumenical. But, I've been to every kind of church that exists, and including synagogues and other houses of worship. And I know that the conversations have a lot to do with things like, well, you shouldn't be angry, right? You shouldn't feel envy. You shouldn't be jealous. You shouldn't be unkind. You shouldn't, and you should, all about emotions, right? And how we behave in the world. So I see emotions as inextricably linked to religions. And I think I have a good friend who's a Buddhist, and she'll say, yeah, well, you know what? Compassion, absolutely connected to Buddhism. So no question, like that's at the root. Compassion, uh, care. So I think that again, without emotions, how would we even have organized religion? And that goes for rituals too. Why do people have any kind of ritual? Right? Why do people um, anyway, we could go on and on, but this whole regard for another life or the people who came before us or a higher being or deities, all of that absolutely based in emotions from my perspective. Advertising and marketing, one of my favorites. So I love watching commercials because so many of them are based on emotions, right? There's one here, Peugeot, which is a car maker, has one now and their whole tagline is motion and emotion. Okay, great. Audis used to be just joy or, feel it or I don't know, something like that. But I also noticed, for instance, on there's advertising on cigarette packages, and they have a picture here. They're really grotesque images of people's lungs with cancer or other cancers. And that what does that provoke? Disgust, right? So you won't smoke. Why? Because you feel disgust or revulsion. So we use it in both ways, right? We say, oh well, oh, people are going to admire you if you have a BMW. People are going to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Envy. And so I think what's really helpful about understanding how emotions move us is we can watch those and see them very differently. Oh, I get what they're doing here. I get they're trying to get me to buy this because, through this. And sometimes it's amazement. I saw an ad last night for an air conditioner, but it's this big and there's no vent and it uses hardly any electricity and amazement. Like I'm watching, I'm going, wow, that's amazing. And so I Googled it and I looked it up and it says, well, probably not what you saw in the commercial. I'm like, I was disappointed, right? So all of this, it's all about emotions. When you see food commercials, right? Makes you hungry, makes you salivate. Why? Desire. So anyway, we could go on and on, but I love how core emotions are to advertising and marketing. Absolutely. I did some work, actually, Cornelia, who some of you know, I did some work for her company previously, which was a global advertising firm. And one of their clients was a car company. And they asked me, could we articulate every step in the sales process and the emotion that the potential buyer needs to be in to move forward in the sales process? And can we train our people to recognize those? And I said, absolutely, you could. I was a little leery about doing it. Thankfully, they didn't ask me to do it. But I thought, well, of course you could. Because why? Well, because if you're going to buy a car, there's clear, distinct steps that you go through, and there's emotions that'll either stop you or they'll cause you to hesitate, or they'll allow you to move forward. And if you're a salesperson or customer service and you can recognize those, then right, you know exactly what's happening with your client. So we'll probably see more and more of this because it works. Just that. Consumerism. So I love consumerism in the sense that, wow, emotions like envy are really powerful. You should, you know what, and fear. Oh my gosh, well, if you don't have this, then you're not going to be popular. So they threaten you with loneliness and et cetera, et cetera. But also envy, you don't want your neighbors to envy you. Um, so again, there's so much about the whole the whole idea of using, collecting, consuming more that is fueled by emotions. Urgency is one of those emotions that shows up quite often. I love it in advertisements. Like now, if you go on anywhere and you're looking at airplane tickets or hotel reservations, what do they say? 14 people reserved here in the last 20 minutes, right? Oh my gosh, I better get my reservation, right? And it works. Really, it works. I get hooked by that sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I better get going on this. But there's so many ways that this gets woven into us buying and consuming things.
I'll share, if you don't mind, Dan, a funny story here. One of my friends, when HGTV first came out, on the, like
Yeah,
the home improvement shows and whatnot,
yeah, yeah,
I used to be a big fan of those. And I was talking to one of my friends, and I was like, "Do you watch this?" And he goes, "Absolutely not." He goes, "All it does is make you hate your house and want to fix everything." So he was like, "I avoid the
yeah.
channel." But in
Yeah.
that dissatisfaction, like that's what it did. It's like everything he watched
Oh yeah.
made his house feel like it needed to be fixed or improved or something.
Yeah. No, dissatisfaction, you're right. Huge one here because if you're dissatisfied, if you don't have enough of something, what will you do? Go get more of it or something in that direction. So yeah, it's fascinating. Any of these, you step back and you just reflect on them a little bit and you start looking at the emotions list and you go, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's actually quite enlightening to see the forces in the wider world that move us in the ways they move us. And then I think to build our own capacity to choose otherwise. Yeah, okay, so they're trying to provoke dissatisfaction in me. am I going to go there? Or am I going to say, you know what? Really, to be honest, I'm not dissatisfied. I'm really satisfied with how my life is. And so that is fine, but it's not for me. I don't need that. So this is, of course, where dignity comes in, among other places. Hi, Melissa. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Okay. So culture. So here we go. Marie, were you want to say culture? I think culture is fascinating how they emerge out of, shared emotions and how culture reflects them as a characteristic, and maybe it's as a mood. But we see this all the time. One of the things people ask me here in Spain is, well, what's the different about Spain and the US? And I say, well, the underlying mood of people is different. And when I was growing up, the emotion that you had to exhibit was ambition. And I got told many times in my career, you need to be more ambitious. I don't know. Seems to have worked out okay. So maybe that wasn't so true. But it's interesting because in the US, my observation has been, at least in the past, that if you didn't exhibit sufficient ambition, the story was there's something wrong with you. In Spain, what's quite interesting, it's not that people aren't ambitious, but ambition isn't the number one emotion. So there are other emotions. And one of the emotions I would say is probably joy. It's just celebrating. You know what? It's still going to the beach, still sitting out at night and eating tapas. It's still going to see your family on Sunday. So it's not as it used to be, but the expression about you work to live or you live to work. I can never remember which way around it is, but in Spain they work to live. Do I have it right? Yeah. And in the US, I had this experience that really seemed like we were living to work. And so ambition was really a powerful emotion. And again, I would say it's not that the Spanish aren't ambitious, but it's not number one on the list in my experience. So cultures everywhere are this way. It's fascinating. And I would say that emotions and moods are one of the primary identifiers, characteristics, the things that cultures exhibit more than anything else. So this one too fascinates me, and particularly because, well, on this call, what do we got? Well, we've got an American Spaniard, two American Spaniards, right? We got a Canadian. Some of the other calls, we got people from India, South Africa, other cultures, and it's fascinating to have conversation with people about this. Like, what are the predominant emotions in your culture? Because I don't know. I don't know what they are. But if I do know what they are, if I do have an idea of what they are, it can help me understand the culture so much better. I don't have to learn every detail about the culture if I understand what are the fundamental moods and emotions that are drivers for that culture, because they're largely invisible to people. It's just what we do. Yeah. Yes, Marie.
It struck me as you were speaking that there's even a more subtler spin on that, and that is if ambition, what when folks said to you, you need to be more ambitious. I remember someone once said to me, I might need to be a little bit less ambitious in my coaching relationships.
Oh,
And
oh my God. Did somebody say that to you, Marie? That was so
they did,
unkind
they
of
did,
them.
they did. But they nailed it. They nailed it. But it occurs to me that it's not just the emotion, but it's how it's regarded and what it's for. Like
Mm,
someone observing you saying you need to be more ambitious. I would say that when you talk about Spanish culture, um, there is ambition there, but maybe the ambition is more expressed in a value for reinforcing and strengthening social ties and family
yeah.
ties.
Okay.
Whereas
Yep.
in another culture, ambition is, when you say the word, it just links to greed or some other collection of emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think achievement, accumulation, that's what in the US, that's what I experience. And
Yeah,
here, it's not that those don't exist, but to your point, there's ambition, but it shows up differently. So
yeah, yeah.
one other thing culturally is that, and this is where the emotionality piece comes in, expressing, being really emotional. Well, I lived in
Yeah.
Italy for 6 months and worked with Italians, coaching them. Anyway, and one of the things I discovered was that, like we all know, Italians, right? They get pretty emotional about stuff. They're very emotionally expressive, and that's quite true in the people I worked with. But when we got down to the level of emotional literacy, talking about, but what does the emotion mean? What's the
Yeah.
cluster? All of the things that we've all worked on, they weren't any more aware, they weren't any more emotionally literate than anybody else in the world. So they were more expressive. In fact, it was expected because the woman I was working with said, I never know if you're really committed to things or not because you don't show it, right? You're not all
You
excitable.
don't wave your
And I'm
hands.
like, well, I am committed. I'm here. I'm doing this. But for her, it was a missing element in me because I didn't express my emotions in the same way that she and other people did. But I also found this in when I worked in Calgary, Jenny, maybe you can confirm this or maybe not, but it was fascinating to me because, we had groups who were training as coaches and they were very emotionally non-expressive. Like they didn't, if you looked at the room, it was a little bit hard to tell, like, is anything going on here? And when we did exercises where people had to connect emotionally, there were people who said, well, that's just weird. And I'm like, okay, well, it may be weird, but it's emotions and we all have them. But one of the things I came to really appreciate is, you know what? Everybody in that room had the full range of emotions. They were just as emotional as human beings as the Italians. There was no difference. The real difference was just the expressiveness. But again, many of the people that I worked with there were just beginning to understand what are emotions and the how do we deconstruct them and what do they mean and why do we have them and what's the purpose and so for me it was really lovely to work into such different cultures in terms of emotions and emotionality. So did I did I say anything bad there, Jenny, or am
No,
I
no.
on
You'll see the real emotions when Stampede comes.
when
Once a year.
Stampede comes?
Yeah. It's a big party. I think these days it depends where you are. Um, and it's like everywhere. We're learning. The normalizing is coming. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Well, let's stop with what I have. We got a few minutes left, but what are you noodling? What are you taking away? What are you reflecting on? What for you has been useful about this half of the conversation today? Yeah, Marcia.
I'll just share. It's been helpful discerning expressiveness of emotion from the emotion. I was married to an Italian, and my entire family was afraid of my husband. They thought he was yelling at me all the time, but I knew he wasn't. He was just very expressive, and as quickly as it would come, it would go. Like it, but that's something I don't think that, um, I think the line gets blurred for people and they think that,
Mm,
what they're hearing is the actual emotion versus maybe the expression,
yeah,
just expressing themselves.
yeah. Thank you. Lovely, lovely distinction.
I think in line with what Marsha just said too, for me, it's that piece between emotion and connection. Like in advertising, marketing, like just the power, whether it's connection in relationship or connection in the behavior that we then do based on that emotion. And when we pay attention to it, to your point, Dan, and the bullets that we got through, it's everywhere. And the power behind it is so significant. It's just that's what's hitting me today.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
And I guess to that point, what Jenny was saying around how pervasive it is, in the world around us, and yet how um, not unaware, but yeah, I guess how unaware we are that that is occurring, and we don't have the language to, kind of understand it, process it, and then kind of, to your point, be intentional about it. So there's this gap, like it's so pervasive and ubiquitous, it's happening all the time, and we're receiving it, but we don't really know it. And then we have to increase that capacity to your point, to recognize it and then have language around it, which is not always shared understanding. So it's almost like there's always this kind of tension you're having to navigate to express it, deal with it, and be more intentional about it.
Yeah, lovely.
I'm making all sorts of connections about having emotions and emotional expressiveness, which like I kind of knew before, but this just brings, a new spotlight to it. And both with the work that I used to do in corporate and also just out in the world in everyday life, just people confusing having emotions with like being expressive, like Marsha's example about
Yeah,
her marriage.
yeah,
Um, and they were afraid of him because he was so expressive.
yeah.
And you can have an emotion and not have hardly any, have like a flat affect and still have the same emotion. So,
Yeah,
it's all what the culture values and what is, yeah. So
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has to do with culture. I think a lot of it has to do with how we're wired, like okay, what are we most comfortable with? But also what's worked for us in the past. So for me, growing up, I polished certain emotions. Why?
Mm.
Because that's what, at least in my mind, was helping me survive or thrive in certain situations. And other ones didn't, other ones were not very helpful. So I think there's a whole combination there. We have these, right? And we have some natural level of expressiveness, and then we have our individual experience where we adapt. And then we have the whole culture that we live in, whether it's our family or various cultures that we live in. And so I think there's many, many places where they get influenced. But again, for me, the whole point is just understanding what's going on. Can I understand? So I'm in choice about what to do next. And I don't get caught doing things just out of habit that are not helpful for me or for my relationships. So yeah, lovely. Thank you. Jen.
Well, the concept of the emotion and the expression of emotion is certainly in my space today too, and making that connection. But just as we were talking about it too, I had the opposite feeling of, as somebody's full expression of emotion comes out, that full expression might make others shrink in their expression of the emotion, right?
Mm.
So that when you hold a room, like my dad is incredibly expressive, so much so
Mhm.
that many other people in my family completely back
Yeah.
down from wanting to talk to him, and then
Yeah.
he thinks he's right, or because or whatever the word is that
Yeah.
describes
Yeah.
him. But it's not because he's right, it's just because
Yeah.
he's the loudest in the room,
Yeah.
and the others are going quiet to, and whether that's what's worked for them in the past or the cultural upbringing, or as you were saying that, I'm like, wow, I could see that completely playing out with my aunt and my dad
Sure.
right now. Like one's backing
Yeah.
down and one's,
Yeah.
puffing his chest, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotions in the middle that nobody's talking about. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And those things, I think, if we can look at, okay, but what are the emotions that have me back down? So it might be apprehension, it might be fear, it might be timidity, it might be prudence, it might be, it might be dignity. I'm choosing not to say anything because I don't see any point in it. And what are the emotions that have him express what he does? Well, who knows? But for me, that's the really interesting thing. It's not, okay, who's right, who's wrong. No, no, no. It's like, okay, but what's really happening here emotionally? Because when we do get to that level, then suddenly everything makes sense to me about the whole situation. Oh, I get it. These are the emotions my dad's in. That's why he's doing this. Here's the emotions my aunt's in. This is why how she's responding this way. Look at that. And then the question is, is that okay with everybody, or do they want to change something? So love it. Great example. Wonderful. So Melissa, we know you're there. Anything you want to say before we sign off?
Yes, I'm here. No, everything's been great. I think the things that you're building between expressiveness and emotions, that's definitely staying with me today as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Well, thank you. We'll conclude next time with the other bullet points. And thanks for playing along. So great. And if you have ideas this week, bring them next week because I'd love to hear them.
Thank
Okay.
you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.